Welcome back to the Deep Dive, everybody. Today we're taking a look at network security
Yep.
in Azure,
Absolutely.
which is an incredibly important topic, I think, for anybody that is either moving to the cloud or is already operating in the cloud,
I
right?
think that's the top concern, honestly, for most companies.
Yeah.
Just because of the nature of, the internet being a public network. So
Yeah, and we've got a ton of material here
Yeah.
to cover in our deep dive today.
yeah, we do. We're going to be going over everything from the foundational pieces to some really sophisticated stuff.
Mm.
But by the end of it, I think people are going to have a really good understanding of just how secure
Yeah.
you can make your Azure environment.
So if you're prepping for a meeting,
Yeah.
you need to get up to speed on this stuff quickly.
Right.
Or maybe you're just interested in the topic.
Yeah,
This is the deep dive for you.
absolutely.
All right, so why don't we jump right into slide 2.
Yeah.
Network security groups. They sound, the name network security group, it sounds very formal, very, technical,
It does.
but they're really just traffic filters at their heart.
Exactly.
And they operate at the virtual network level.
That's right. So within your virtual networks, you can control traffic
Yeah.
with network security groups.
So imagine like a border crossing, between
That's like the border patrol.
2 countries. Every vehicle, that would be every network packet,
Yeah,
has to stop and show its papers
exactly. And either they're allowed through or
Yeah.
they're denied entry.
based on a specific set of rules.
Right. And those rules can be incredibly specific.
Yeah, they really can. I mean, we can name each rule so that
You want to name them
we know what they are. Know what we're looking at when we're trying to audit things later.
Of course.
Right.
Yeah.
We can specify whether it's inbound or outbound traffic.
Yeah.
We can set the priority.
Right.
We can allow or deny the connection based on IP addresses.
That's right.
Protocol or
Yeah.
port numbers.
Exactly. All those things. So you can say, only allow traffic from this IP address on this port using this protocol.
It's really granular.
Yeah.
And that priority thing is important because I understand if there's a conflict,
Yeah.
the lowest numerical priority
Right.
wins, meaning it's considered the most important rule.
That's right. So you want to, when you're designing your network security groups, you really want to think about what are the most important rules.
So you're thinking about it in terms of, okay, the most important thing is to prevent certain types of traffic or allow certain types of traffic.
Right.
And you kind of work your way down from there.
That's right. And that's part of the design, right? You want to make sure you're not being too permissive with your early rules.
So you can have, so now how many of these network security groups
Oh, you can have a lot.
and security rules can you have?
Yeah. So the default per region, per subscription, you can have up to 100 NSGs. And then within each NSG, you can have up to 200 rules.
Okay.
But those limits can actually be expanded.
Right.
So you can go up to 400 NSGs per region, per subscription.
Got it.
And then the rules can be expanded up to 500.
So that's a lot.
It's quite a bit.
It's a lot of security.
Yeah.
Okay, slide 3. Application security groups.
Yeah.
Now, this is where things get really interesting because instead of controlling traffic at the network level,
Right.
we're now looking at our applications and how we're going to secure them.
So application security groups, or ASGs, are a way to group your virtual machines
Okay.
and apply security policies based on those groups.
So instead of I'm thinking of in a large office building, right?
Yeah.
Like instead of trying to remember everybody's desk number and who's allowed to go where.
Exactly. You don't want to have to remember all the IP addresses.
Just thinking about, okay, what department are you in?
Right.
And what are the rules for your department?
Exactly.
Like if you're in sales,
Yeah.
you can go to these areas,
Right.
but you can't go to these areas.
Yeah, exactly.
So this allows you to manage security in a way that,
It makes it much easier to manage, especially when you start getting larger environments, right?
yeah, it makes more sense, right?
Yeah.
Like a lot of times things are grouped logically like that anyway.
Exactly.
You might have one ASG for all your web servers.
Yeah, like all your front-end web servers.
Another one for your application servers, maybe another one for your database servers.
Exactly.
And you could define the security policies for each of those groups.
Right. So you can say, my web servers can talk to my application servers,
Right.
but they can't talk to my database servers.
And this really simplifies things, especially as your application scales.
Oh, absolutely. Because if you're constantly having to go back and update security rules based on individual IPs as things change and things scale, it just becomes a nightmare.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you mentioned that in a security rule, we can only use one ASG
Right.
as a source and one as a destination. Why is that?
It really comes down to, it seems like a limitation, and in some ways it is, but it's a limitation that's there
Right.
to actually benefit us in terms of security.
Okay.
Because it forces us to think about these roles very specifically and not make things overly complex.
Okay.
Because if you could have multiple ASGs as a source and multiple ASGs as a destination, you can imagine just how complex those rules could get.
Yeah.
And then if something goes wrong and you need to troubleshoot,
Right.
where do you start?
Yeah.
So it's really about keeping things clear and manageable.
So it forces you to think about, okay,
Right.
what are the actual relationships
Probably
between
does-
these groups?
Yeah.
And how do I want to control those?
Exactly. What can talk to what?
So that's ASGs. Slide 4, service endpoints and private links. Now we're talking about establishing secure connections to Azure services.
Right. So this is where, a lot of companies will have resources in Azure, like storage accounts,
Oh, yeah.
SQL databases, things like that.
Right.
And they need to be able to access those securely.
Yeah.
So service endpoints are a way to do that.
Okay.
And what they do is they essentially extend your virtual network
Got it.
to these Azure services.
So like a private lane
Exactly. It's like a dedicated lane
on a highway
on the highway.
going straight to that service.
Exactly. And only your virtual network can use that lane.
Okay.
So it's a much more secure way to connect.
So that's not going over the public internet.
No, it stays within the Azure network,
Okay.
which is a huge advantage for security.
And you mentioned optimal routing. What does that mean?
So because it stays within the Azure network, the routing is optimized.
Okay.
So it's going to be the fastest and most efficient route. And because it's all private, it's also going to be the most secure route.
Now, how are private links different from this?
So private links are a newer feature,
Okay.
and they take things a step further.
Okay.
So instead of just extending your virtual network,
Right.
private links actually create a private endpoint
Got it.
for the Azure service within your virtual network.
So it's like if service endpoint is like having that dedicated lane on the highway,
Right.
a private link is like,
Private link is like building a tunnel,
yeah,
a secret tunnel
from your
virtual network right to the Azure service.
tax service.
And no one else knows about that tunnel.
Okay, and nobody else can use it.
Right. It's completely private.
So private links actually require an approval process.
They do. So when you want to establish a private link, you have to request it from the service provider.
Okay.
So for example, if you want to connect to a storage account using a private link, you would send a request to the storage account service,
Okay.
and they would either approve or deny your request.
So it's a bit more involved than just setting up.
It is. It's a little bit more involved,
I
but
guess just endpoint.
it's a much more secure way to connect.
Okay, so when would you use one over the other?
So service endpoints are great when you just need to secure access to a service,
Okay.
and you're not too concerned about having a public endpoint.
Okay.
Private links are really for when you need the highest level of security,
Got it.
and you want to completely isolate that service from the public internet.
So when you need to really lock things down.
Exactly.
Okay. Moving on to slide 5, Azure Application Gateway and Web Application Firewall, or WA.
Yes. So now we're getting into the world of web applications and securing those.
So Application Gateway, it's more than just a basic load balancer.
It is. So a basic load balancer just takes traffic and distributes it
Right.
across multiple servers.
Even-
Right. But Application Gateway can actually make decisions about where to send that traffic based on the content of the request.
So it's an intelligent
It's like a smart load balancer.
traffic director,
Gateway.
making sure that
Like an air traffic controller.
the right traffic gets to the right place.
Making sure that the planes land on the right runway.
And it has some other features too, right? Like
Sure.
SSL/TLS termination,
Right.
auto scaling,
Yep.
zone redundancy.
That's right. So it can handle all of the SSL certificates.
Right.
It can scale up or down based on demand.
Yeah.
And it can even be spread across multiple availability zones so that if one zone goes down,
Got it.
your application is still available.
So high availability built in.
Exactly.
And then we've got the web application firewall.
Right. So this is where the security really comes in.
Yeah.
Because the web application firewall, or WA,
Mm-hmm.
sits in front of your application. And it inspects all of the incoming traffic
Right.
for any malicious activity.
So it's like a bouncer at a club,
It is.
looking for anybody
That's looking for the troublemaker.
that's trying to get in. It's that
Exactly.
problem.
And if it finds somebody who looks suspicious,
Right.
it kicks them out.
And it knows what to look for,
Yeah.
right? It knows the common attacks.
That's right. So things like SQL injection,
Right.
cross-site scripting,
Yeah.
all of those common web attacks, the Wave knows about them and can block them.
So we don't have to code defenses against these attacks
Right.
into each individual.
You don't have to do it in every single application.
You can just let the Wave handle it?
It's centralized. Okay, now slide 6. Azure Front Door.
Yeah.
This sounds like application gateway, but
It's kind of like application gateway on steroids.
global.
Yeah, exactly. So application gateway is regional.
Okay.
It operates within a single region.
Okay.
Front door is global. Got it.
So it can be used to load balance traffic across multiple regions.
So if you've got an application that's deployed in multiple regions around the world,
Right.
this is the tool you would use.
Exactly.
And it's designed for high performance and security.
Absolutely.
So how does it make sure that users are connected to the closest point of presence? You mentioned, I think in the pre-show notes, this split TCP-based Anycast protocol.
Yeah, so it's a little bit technical, but
Right.
basically what it means is that when a user tries to connect to your application,
Right.
their traffic is routed to the nearest front door POP.
Point of presence.
Right, point of presence.
Got it.
And it uses Anycast routing to do that,
Okay.
which means that the DNS server will return the IP address of the closest POP.
Okay.
So it's a very efficient way to make sure that users are connected to the
Yeah.
fastest and closest location.
And then split TCP.
And then split TCP takes it a step further.
Yeah.
So it splits the TCP connection into 2 parts.
Okay.
So the first part of the connection is between the user and the front door POP.
Okay.
And that's a very fast, efficient connection.
Right.
And then the second part of the connection is between the front door POP and your application backend.
Got it.
And that's a separate connection that's optimized for performance.
Okay.
So it's a very clever way to get the best of both worlds.
So you get low latency, high performance.
Exactly.
And it has security features too, right?
Absolutely. So it has built-in DDoS protection.
Right.
It can handle SSL/TLS termination.
Yeah.
It can do URL rewriting.
So it's really a comprehensive solution.
It really is.
Okay. Slide 7. User-defined routes, or UDRs, and network virtual appliances. Now we're getting into some real customization here.
Yeah. So this is where you can really start to fine-tune your network traffic.
Okay.
So by default, Azure has its own routing rules,
Right.
but with user-defined routes, you can override those rules.
Okay.
So you can create your own custom routes.
So if I wanted to, for example, make sure that all traffic from a certain subnet
Right.
goes through a specific virtual appliance,
You can do that with UDRs.
I can do that.
Yeah.
Okay, and remind me, what are network virtual appliances?
So network virtual appliances, or NVAs, are basically virtual machines
Okay.
that are designed to perform a specific network function.
Okay.
So things like firewalls,
Right.
intrusion detection systems,
Yeah.
WAN optimizers, all of those things can be deployed as NVAs,
Okay.
and you can use UDRs to direct traffic through those NVAs.
Oh, if I've got a really, really sensitive subnet, I can
Yeah.
say, okay, before anything leaves or enters this subnet,
Exact.
it has to go through this.
It's got to go through this checkpoint,
Right point.
this security checkpoint.
Got it. Right.
And that security checkpoint can be as sophisticated as you need it to be.
Now, you did mention that NVAs can be a single point of failure. What does that mean, and how do we prevent that?
So that's a good point. If you only have one NVA, and that NVA goes down,
Right.
then all of the traffic that's supposed to go through that NVA is also going to be down.
It's blocked.
Right. So to prevent that, what you can do is deploy multiple NVAs in an availability set.
Okay.
And an availability set is basically a way to group VMs together
Got it.
so that they're not all running on the same physical hardware.
Okay.
So if one piece of hardware goes down, the other VMs in the availability set
Right,
will
yeah.
still be running.
So that creates redundancy.
Exactly. It creates redundancy and it helps to prevent that single point of failure.
Okay, and finally, slide 8, Express Route and Express Route Direct. This is for dedicated private connections, right?
Right. So this is for companies that need a more reliable and secure connection to Azure
Okay.
than what you can get over the public internet.
Okay.
So ExpressRoute is basically a dedicated private connection
Got it.
between your on-premises network and Azure.
So it's like having a fiber optic cable
It's like having a fiber optic cable
running
and
straight
it
down on
connects
the
from your building to Azure.
Exactly.
Okay.
And it bypasses the public internet completely.
And more secure.
It's more secure, it's more reliable,
Okay.
and it's usually faster.
Okay.
And it's also a good option for companies that have to comply with certain regulations
Right.
that require private connectivity.
And then ExpressRoute Direct, how is that different?
So ExpressRoute Direct is basically a more direct connection.
Okay.
So instead of going through a third-party provider,
Right.
you connect directly to Microsoft's network
Okay.
at one of their peering locations.
Okay.
And this gives you even higher bandwidth and even lower latency.
Got it.
So it's really for companies that have very demanding workloads
Okay.
that need the best possible connection to Azure.
So when would you use ExpressRoute
Right.
versus just a regular internet connection?
So if you need a guaranteed level of bandwidth,
Okay.
if you need a very low latency connection,
Yeah. If you need a more secure connection,
Right.
or if you have to comply with certain regulations,
got it.
then ExpressRoute is a good option.
And ExpressRoute Direct if
Yeah.
you need even more.
Right. If you need the absolute best possible connection.
Now, you mentioned hybrid connectivity. How do ExpressRoute and VPNs fit into that?
So you can actually use both ExpressRoute and VPNs
Okay.
for hybrid connectivity.
Okay.
So you could use ExpressRoute as your primary connection.
Right.
And then you could use a VPN as a backup.
Got it.
So if your ExpressRoute connection goes down for some reason,
Right.
your VPN connection can take over.
So that you've always got that connection.
Exactly. So you always have a way to connect to Azure.
So we've covered a lot of ground today
We have.
in this deep dive.
Yeah.
From the basic network security groups
Right.
all the way up to ExpressRoute Direct.
Yeah. It's been a really good overview of the security options available in Azure.
Yeah. And the key takeaway here, I think, is that you don't have to use just one of these things.
Yeah.
You know, a layered approach to security is always the best approach.
Right. Because no single solution is going to be perfect.
Right.
So you want to have multiple layers of defense.
Yeah. So think about your specific needs.
Right.
What are you trying to protect?
Exists.
What are the threats that you're facing?
Right.
And then choose the right tools for the job.
And don't forget, security is an ongoing process. It's not something you do once and then forget about it.
Yeah.
You have to constantly be evaluating your security posture
Right.
and making sure that you're staying ahead of the threats.
So in our next deep dive,
Yeah.
we're going to shift our focus from the network perimeter to the individual compute resources themselves. We're going to be diving into host security in Azure.
It should be a good one.
Yeah, we're going to be exploring topics like endpoint protection, privileged access workstations, VM templates,
Right.
remote access management, update management, disk encryption,
Yep.
Windows Defender,
It's going to be a lot of fun.
and Azure Security Center.
A lot of really practical advice.
Yeah, so be sure to join us for that. But for now, as you consider the digital landscape that your applications inhabit, how can you proactively weave these network security measures into the very fabric of your Azure environment to ensure resilience and protection?
That's a good question to think about.
Yeah. And that's it for this time on the Deep Dive.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.